Ladies and gentlemen, sometimes the world shifts overnight. Lines are drawn not in the sand, but in fire, and in the face of destruction, some bow while others rise. Today, I'm not here to talk about politics. I'm here to talk about conviction, about courage under pressure, and about what it means when two giants collide, not just with weapons, but with will. Because when America made its move, Iran didn't just endure, it stood. You see, there comes a time when silence is no longer an option, when shadows must be exposed. And whether you agree or not, whether you stand with the strike or question the motive, truth remains. America acted. They struck deep, not just facilities, but symbols. Symbols of secrecy, symbols of ambition, trying to send a message that echoes louder than bombs. But here's where the story flips. Because Iran, a nation that has endured centuries of sanctions, pressure, and isolation, didn't fall to its knees. It didn't run. It didn't surrender. It stood defiant. Why? Because there's something more powerful than technology, more enduring than missiles. And that's belief. Belief in your right to exist. Belief in your people. Belief in your purpose. Now, I'm not here to glorify war. War destroys. War divides. War breaks. But the human spirit, that builds, that resists, that rises. You can flatten a building, but you can't crush conviction. You can strike a site, but you cannot strike spirit. And when a nation decides to stand, not just for power, not just for pride, but to be heard, truly heard, then the battle becomes about more than bombs. It becomes about identity. Look around the world right now. It's not just Iran. It's not just America. It's people everywhere fighting to be seen, fighting to be respected, fighting to matter. And when the storm hits, when the fire rains, you don't measure strength in numbers. You measure it in nerve, in grit. Power is loud. It roars. It flies in fast like thunder in the night sky. Sudden like a slap, unexpected like betrayal. Power shakes the earth. Explosions, headlines, declarations. And when America launched that strike, that's what the world saw. Pure, unfiltered force. Clean cut, strategic, absolute. But understand something, power is not the same as strength. See, power might show up with satellites and warheads, steel and fire, drones that see everything from the sky. But conviction shows up in silence, in stillness, in the eyes of a people who refuse to blink. You can have all the weapons in the world, but if the other side believes, truly believes in what they're standing for, then power alone can't win. Because conviction, that's slow, burning fire. That's not the kind of thing you can measure on a radar or track on a map. That's the kind of thing you only see after the smoke clears and the people are still standing, bloody maybe, broken maybe, but still standing. Power strikes. Conviction survives. Conviction doesn't come from flags. It doesn't come from titles or uniforms. It doesn't need permission. It comes from pain. It comes from memory. It comes from watching generations before you bleed. And never forget, when those bombs dropped on Iran's hidden sites, it was power doing what power does, sending a message, a warning, a flex. But what happened next was something power didn't expect. The world leaned in, expecting collapse, expecting Iran to fold, but it didn't. Why? Because conviction doesn't get intimidated by missiles. Conviction's not afraid of loss. Conviction plans for pain. Conviction expects it. And most importantly, conviction endures it. That's what makes it unbreakable. Now, don't misunderstand. This is not about choosing sides. This is about recognizing something deeper than politics. This is about understanding that human will, when rooted in identity, in history, in pain, in purpose, becomes invincible. Power is temporary. It shines for a moment. It creates shockwaves, yes. But then what? If there's no conviction behind it, it fades. It fizzles. It gets replaced by the next headline, the next conflict, the next missile strike. But conviction passes down from father to son, from mother to daughter. Conviction survives borders, survives sanctions, survives being outnumbered, outspent, outgunned. Because conviction doesn't live in buildings. It lives in bones. That's why you see people under rubble still raising flags. That's why you see nations stripped of resources still holding on to hope. That's why a strike, no matter how precise, no matter how powerful, cannot erase belief. Let me tell you something. The most dangerous person in any room is not the loudest one. It's the one who's been hit and still doesn't back down. It's the one who's been counted out and still shows up. That's not arrogance. That's conviction. And that's what we saw when Iran stood up. Not bravado. Not chest beating. Not ego, conviction. The world has seen power destroy, but the world has also seen conviction rebuild, brick by brick, day by day, soul by soul. So when we say power may strike fast, but conviction holds strong, we're not talking theory. We're talking history. We're talking reality. We're talking about the difference between someone who shows up to fight and someone who was born in the fire. So go ahead, send the drones, launch the warnings, call the bluffs. But don't ever underestimate the ones who believe in something more than survival, because those are the people who can never be conquered. When a missile locks onto a target, it doesn't ask questions. It doesn't care what that building means to a people. It doesn't feel the history in those walls. It just strikes. Cold, clean, final. And when America hit Iran's hidden nuclear sites, that's exactly what it did. It struck what it saw as threat, as danger, as defiance. It struck the symbol, the hidden ambition, the unspoken challenge. But what it couldn't strike was the spirit behind it. You see, you can destroy concrete. You can vaporize equipment. You can flatten a facility that took years to build in just seconds. But you cannot kill meaning. Not with fire. Not with steel. Not even with shock. Because symbols, no matter how large, how guarded, how important, they are still just structures. What gives them weight is what lives inside them. The belief, the intention, the dream, the struggle behind the creation. And those things don't burn. You can burn a flag, but you don't erase patriotism. You can demolish a statue, but you don't rewrite the soul. You can attack a site, but you don't extinguish purpose. See, That's the difference between destruction and defeat. Destruction is physical. It's fast. It's loud. It's visible. But defeat, that's emotional. That's spiritual. And that's a whole different battlefield. Iran's sights were struck. The world saw it. Headlines lit up. Screens flashed red. But when the dust settled, something deeper remained untouched. The will of a nation to define itself. Spirit doesn't live in the ground. It doesn't need four walls and a roof. Spirit isn't built in labs. It's built in loss, in memory, in identity. It lives in the people. The ones who pray, protest, fight, weep, and keep going. That's what makes it unstoppable. And that's what power never quite understands. It can destroy a weapon, but it can't destroy why someone built it. It can kill a plan, but it can't kill hope. It can flatten a lab, but it can't flatten faith. Because spirit isn't a place. It's not a target on a map. It's a fire in the heart. And once it's lit, you can't put it out. Not with missiles, not with threats, not even with death. That's why, time and time again, nations under fire don't crumble the way others expect. Because long before they built their buildings, they built their spirit. Long before they raised flags, they buried history in their hearts. Long before they prepared for war, they prepared to endure. So when a strike comes, yes, it shakes the ground. Yes, it breaks what's visible. But it also awakens what's invisible. It calls out the soul of a people. And that soul, that is what makes them rise again. You can't erase memory. You can't erase pain. You can't erase pride. And when people hold those three things close, they become unshakable. Think about it. Why does a mother keep going when she's lost everything? Why does a soldier stand up when his side is losing? Why do the poor sing even when the world ignores them? Because the spirit refuses to die. Because it doesn't ask for permission. Because it grows stronger in fire. And in this case, the strike on Iran's nuclear sites wasn't just an act of military force. It was a test of what could be broken and what couldn't. And the answer was loud and clear. You can hit the symbol, you can scar the surface, but the spirit, that's untouchable. It may bend, it may bleed, it may fall to one knee, but it never ever breaks. Because spirit isn't made of steel, it's made of sacrifice. And sacrifice never dies. You never really know who you are until the storm hits. Not when things are easy. Not when the skies are clear and the world claps for you. You learn who you are when it all starts falling apart. When the sirens scream. When the ground shakes. When everything you built starts cracking. Because crisis doesn't just test strength. It reveals identity. It peels back everything that's superficial. The talk, the pride, the posturing, and it shows you who you really are. And not just as a person, but as a people. When the missiles struck Iran's hidden nuclear sites, it wasn't just about damage. It wasn't just about hitting underground bunkers or secret facilities. It was about pressing a question into the heart of a nation. Who are you now? Are you the silence after the explosion? Are you the fear that follows the fire? Or are you something deeper? Something that doesn't shake even when the world tries to move you. Because here's the truth: identity isn't built in peace. It's revealed in pain. It shows up not when you're comfortable, but when you're cornered. That's why you see some nations lose themselves after a crisis. They crumble, splinter, turn on each other, because their foundation wasn't truth. It wasn't unity. It wasn't belief. It was comfort. It was convenience. And when crisis comes, comfort runs. But in Iran, something else happened. Something the world didn't expect. The harder the hit, the clearer the voice became. Not of the government, not of the politics. I'm talking about the people, the mothers, the sons, the students, the builders, the broken. They didn't fade into fear. They stood inside it. Because identity is not about how you look. It's not about what you claim. It's about what you won't let go of, even when everything else is taken from you. You take a man's job, he'll suffer. You take his house, he'll grieve. But if you try to take his identity, his core, his blood, his belonging, that's when you'll see the fight rise. That's when the soul stops backing down. See, the people of Iran weren't just standing up to missiles. They were standing up to the idea that someone else could define them, that someone else could say, "This is all you are. This is what we allow you to be." No, that wasn't going to fly, because the fire didn't weaken them, it woke them. You want to know who someone is? Back them into a wall, corner them with loss, strike at what they love, and then watch what rises. Sometimes it's rage, sometimes it's sorrow, but the strongest, most unstoppable thing that rises is identity. The reminder that we were here before this, and we will be here after this. That our name didn't come from wealth or power. It came from survival, from pushing through centuries of pressure and pain, from remembering who we are, even when the world forgets. That's what Iran showed. Not a perfect face, not a polished answer, but a real one, a raw one, a soul forged not in victory, but in endurance. And whether the world agrees or not, whether they understand or not, doesn't change the fact that in that moment of fire, Iran didn't lose itself. It found itself. In crisis, identity rises because it has no choice, because it's either that or disappear. And for those who've lived through war, who've buried names and carried flags in trembling hands, who've learned how to walk while the world collapses around them, disappearing is never an option. They hold on tighter. They speak louder. They stand firmer, because identity isn't a costume you wear. It's the skin you fight in. And in that skin, even under attack, even under threat, they stood. And the world took notice. Anybody can throw a punch. Anybody can pull a trigger, drop a bomb, fire a missile. That's easy. That's reflex. That's instinct. You hit me, I hit you back. That's the oldest story in the world. But real courage is what happens after the impact, after the smoke, after the loss, after the choice to rise, not in rage, but in restraint. Not to prove you can hurt, but to prove you can endure. When America struck Iran's hidden nuclear sites, it wasn't just a test of defense. It was a test of dignity. It was a test of how Iran would respond and whether it would break, lash out, or crumble. But it didn't. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is not hit back right away. See, we live in a world that loves revenge. It cheers for the comeback. It glorifies the counterattack. It says, don't let them walk over you. Show them who's boss. But that mindset, that's not courage. That's ego in a war mask. True courage isn't loud. It doesn't always come with flags, waving and fists raised. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like holding your people together when the world expects you to fall apart. Because retaliation is easy, it's fast, it's emotional, it's dramatic. But resilience is quiet. It's disciplined. It's rooted in purpose. To retaliate means you give in to the moment. To be resilient means you rise above it. You don't react out of pain. You respond with clarity. You don't rush to return fire. You choose to own the fire within you and turn it into fuel. That's what Iran did. It absorbed the strike. It stood in the fire and didn't flinch the way the world expected, because it understood something deeper. That dignity doesn't live in destruction, it lives in survival. In not letting someone else's violence define your story. You see, there's a kind of power that comes from patience, from knowing you can strike, but choosing not to, not because you're weak, but because you know your strength isn't in how loud you respond, it's in how long you can stand. And make no mistake, that takes more guts than revenge ever will. It's easy to be angry. It's hard to be strategic. It's easy to burn it all down. It's hard to hold the line and rebuild while the world is watching. But that's courage. Not in the movies, not in fairy tales, in real life. Courage is waking up the day after loss and choosing to keep going. Courage is looking your people in the eyes and saying, we're still here. Courage is knowing the enemy wants a reaction and refusing to give them one. It's walking through the fire without letting it change who you are. It's absorbing pain and not turning it into poison. It's choosing legacy over impulse, future over fury. Iran's response, or restraint, wasn't a weakness. It was a message, a statement that said, we know what you did. We felt it. We buried the damage. But we're still standing, not because we hit back, but because we never left. And that kind of strength, that lasts longer than any explosion, that echoes louder than any bomb. Because anyone can break something, but to build in the ruins, that's rare. To lead when your people are hurting, that's leadership. To rise not with rage, but with resolve, that's legacy. That's the difference between a reaction and a revolution. That's the difference between making noise and making history. So no, courage isn't about getting even. It's about not giving in. And those who master that, they're not just powerful, they're unstoppable. We look at the world and we see headlines: war, strikes, retaliation, politics. We hear nations arguing, leaders warning, and missiles flying across skies that used to be silent. It feels far away, foreign, unreachable. But the truth is, these global events, these wars between countries, These fights for control, for power, for respect, they're not just about governments. They're not just about maps and borders. They're reflections. Reflections of what we go through every single day. You may not be on a battlefield, but you know what it's like to be attacked, not by bombs, but by doubt, by fear, by failure, by people who tell you you're not good enough, not smart enough, not strong enough. You may not live under sanctions or strikes, but you've lived through days when you didn't know how to keep going, when you had to stand up with nothing left but your breath and your belief. Because the fight for identity, for survival, for dignity, that doesn't just happen on a world stage. It happens inside every human heart. What Iran faced, a powerful force coming down on its territory, its purpose, its pride, that's what you face when life comes crashing into your plans. When circumstances you didn't ask for threaten everything you worked for. When people misunderstand you, underestimate you, or try to define your worth on their terms. When a country is tested, it either stands or falls. And the same goes for a person. And maybe that's why moments like this shake us deeper than we admit. Because when we watch a nation stand up in defiance, we see a reflection of our own spirit, refusing to break under pressure. We see our own will, our own struggle, our own refusal to be erased. You don't have to be in Iran to understand what it means to be misunderstood. You don't have to wear a uniform to know the weight of being targeted. You don't have to launch a missile to know what it feels like to fight for your name, your voice, your worth. That's the thing. Global conflicts echo personal battles. The names change. The weapons change. The language is different. But the core, the soul of the fight, it's the same. It's about being seen, being respected, being allowed to exist fully, freely, fiercely. Some people think politics is distant. That war is just something that happens on TV screens, not in real life. But war isn't just bullets and bombs. War is being told to sit down when you were born to rise. War is being denied opportunities because of your background, your color, your faith, your past. War is fighting to be heard in rooms that were never built to hear you. And so when a nation refuses to bow, when it chooses its voice over silence, its pride over fear, its future over pressure, that's not just a national act. That's a human act. That's every person who ever walked back into school after failing. Every woman who stood in a boardroom full of men and spoke her truth. Every young person who came from nothing and refused to accept that as their ending. Every single one of them, like that nation, stood in defiance, not to be reckless, not to start a fight, but to say, I matter, I belong, I am still here. And that's why we connect with these moments. That's why they hit so hard. Because beneath the politics, beneath the speeches and strategies and systems, what we're really watching is ourselves. Ourselves on the edge. Ourselves in the storm. Ourselves choosing not to give up. So no, these aren't just distant events. They're mirrors. And sometimes all it takes is watching a nation stand unshaken in the fire to remind us that we can too. Because whether it's the world or your world, The fight is real, the resistance is necessary, and the victory, even if no one sees it but you, is worth it. So now we come to the end, not the end of a speech, but the end of a moment that demands more than just listening. It demands awakening. Because what happened out there, when America struck those hidden nuclear sites, when fire lit the sky and headlines lit the world, that wasn't just politics. That wasn't just strategy. That wasn't just one nation warning another. That was a message to all of us. A message about power. A message about pressure. And most of all, a message about what it takes to stand when everything is trying to knock you down. You see, in that moment, when Iran didn't crumble, when it stood still, stood tall, stood unshaken, it reminded the world of a truth we try to forget. That real strength is not proven in how hard you hit. It's proven in how deep you stand when you've been hit. That's what conviction looks like. It doesn't panic. It doesn't vanish. It stays rooted, firm, unmovable. And you can try to destroy the symbols. You can bomb the sites, silence the stations, break the structures. But you can't destroy what lives inside people. Their belief, their identity, their reasons for rising. That's the part power can never reach. Because spirit is not a location. It's not a city or a secret base. It's not in blueprints or maps or treaties. Spirit lives in people, in memory, in history, in scars passed down like bloodlines. And in that spirit, we don't just see a nation standing. We see ourselves. We see our own fire, our own fights, our own days where we were underestimated, disrespected, pushed into corners and expected to break. And yet here we are, still breathing, still dreaming, still standing, just like Iran stood. And maybe that's the real reason this moment matters. Not because it might reshape alliances or spark retaliation, but because it reminds us what kind of strength truly lasts. Resilience, not revenge. Clarity, not chaos. Purpose, not panic. See, the world will always celebrate the loudest move, the fastest strike, the biggest fire. But time, history, always remembers the one who refused to fall, the one who took the hit and still walked forward, the one who didn't just survive, but stayed rooted in who they were. That's the courage we saw, not in missiles, but in meaning, not in counterattacks, but in composure, not in destruction, but in dignity. And that dignity, that resolve, that deep and quiet resistance, that's something no one can take. Not America, not sanctions, not threats, not fire. Because when a people know who they are, when their spirit is older than their enemy's anger, when they carry their history like armor, there is nothing more dangerous than that kind of stillness. And that's what shook the world. Not the strike, not the target, but the silence that came after. The silence of a nation not broken, but bracing, not begging, but becoming something more focused, more intentional, more ready. So as we walk away from this moment, let us not just remember what happened. Let us remember what it revealed. It revealed that in every crisis, a deeper truth rises. It revealed that identity, once awakened, cannot be silenced. It revealed that, in a world obsessed with showing force, Sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply to stand your ground. And whether you're a nation under fire or a person under pressure, that lesson is the same. Power might make noise, but spirit makes legacy. So don't just survive the storm,